Well, thanks for inviting us back. I've spoken to this group a couple times before, and we've got a whole new initiative we're getting kicked off here, and we need your help. That's why we're here tonight. We all know what the Declaration of Independence declared. It declared our right to hold our government accountable, but they operate under the consent of the government. And what we're here to do tonight is to show you about a brand new initiative to engage more people. We've been talking to the choir for the last 5 or 6 years, but we need to reach out and talk to other groups. We need to get more people engaged and help them to realize that our liberties are being taken away. And I don't think it's going to be that hard to do now, because we can see, if you're paying attention at all what's going on, you see that our liberties are being stripped from us left and right. So the people retain the right to define the powers that we delegate to the government. The exercise of that right, taking whatever course necessary to secure compliance. That's not exactly how it said and stated in the Declaration of Independence, but basically that's what it's saying there. But with your help and your engagement with other people around the state, we can reclaim America with God's help as well. But what we need to do is we've got to reach out to other groups. We've got to get more people engaged in this process. The purpose is we want to find at least one person in every county of the state. There's 159 counties. We have one person that will commit to be involved with our group, to network with us, and we're going to explain to you what their role will be, but to reach out to other people in their community. This can be a powerful voice at the state capitol. You can imagine if every county we have one person reaches out to 10, and those 10 people contact their legislature during the state legislative session. That can be a powerful impact. So what we're looking at is having a network of people from every county. We've been going down to the Capitol for the last few years, 20 or 30 people from Cobb County, I'm sure probably 20 or 30 people from Gwinnett, but we need to have voices from all over the state, not just the major counties in the metro area. As Sam Adams says, it does not take a majority to prevail, but rather an irate, tireless minority, keen on setting the brush fires of freedom in the minds of men. Now, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Richard Arena. He's going to lead you through the legal aspect of this, the constitutional aspect, and I'm going to sit on the sideline here and maybe pipe in every few minutes as having some key points to throw in there. Please welcome Richard Arena.
Thank you one and all, Steve, David. I did want to recognize the fact that Field and I are part of a group, a committee, I guess you would call it, called Restore and Preserve the Constitution. It's chaired by Debbie Staver. I guess some of y'all may know Debbie, and some of the other committee members are here tonight, Sherry, James, Kim, Field, and myself. And we started out, we were thinking about how we were going to oppose a convention of the states, but then the more we thought about it, we thought, you know, what we really need to do is reclaim the Constitution. That's the real problem. The problem is that the Constitution's not being obeyed, not that there is a problem with the Constitution. We need to get the politicians to pay attention. So how do we do that? And so this is what we've decided that we need to do, is we need to get a lot more people engaged. We had a lot of people engaged early on in this, I guess you would call it counter-revolution. That's the way I look at it. In 2010, we all went to D.C., about 2 million people, and then it's fallen off. I haven't been to this particular meeting but one other time, and it seems like probably the same people come every meeting, and we're not really adding to our group, okay? But we know that there are a lot of people that think like us that are sitting on the sidelines. And as long as they're sitting on the sidelines, especially if they're not voting, we're really not going to make an impact. We have made our voices heard, but the direction our country is going, and it's still going in the wrong direction, we haven't turned it around yet. And that's what we're about. We got to think about how are we going to turn it around. Okay, so it takes commitment. First of all, we need commitment of people like yourselves. You're committed, or you wouldn't be here tonight. But we need the commitment of other people who aren't here tonight. This irate, tireless minority that Phil was talking about, let's take a look at some history. During the Revolution, only 40% of the people were actually committed to breaking away from Great Britain, a minority. About 20% were loyal to the crown. They did not want to break away. And another 40%, they were neutral. They could go either way. And as George Lincoln Rockwell observed, revolution is a spectator sport. The majority will sit in the stands and watch the faction fight. At the end of the day, they will side with the team that's winning. I think it was true during the Revolutionary War period, and I think that's very true again today. We don't need to have a majority, but we do need to have people who are committed and willing to fight for their rights and fight to get us back our Constitution. Let's take a look at some interesting parallels between those figures from the late 18th century and today. Can you all see that chart? It's kind of hard to see. It shows the political ideologies of American citizens. This is a poll. I think this was taken either by Pew or Gallup. Let's see, Gallup Corporation. The top line there, the blue line, that's conservatives. People who self-identify as conservatives are the majority. It's over 40%. The next highest is people who say that they're moderate. And down there at the bottom, that green line is a little over 20%. Those are the people that self-identify as liberal. So you can see that we're in the plurality. So why are we being driven to the left? Why are we being driven into socialism? It's because they're in charge of the government. They're in charge of the media. They're in charge of all the institutions within our nation that are most influential in the formation of public opinion and policy. And it's going to take people, and it's going to take people speaking up and taking action to turn that around. Take a look at this chart. This is people who identify as Republican, Independent, and Democrat. Notice here in 2005, if y'all can see that, well, you can't, the sun's there. All right, in 2005, very interesting thing happens. Republican Party membership starts dropping off. In 2013, it was at 25% of the people in this poll. Again, this is I think this one is a Pew poll. And people who are independent, that's on the rise. And you can see, if you could see the chart, you would see that it takes off exactly when the Republican Party starts dropping down, independents start going up. So people who were Republicans started to get wise. Oh, these guys are just like the Democrats. They're just telling a different story to us to get us to vote for them. And the people who are a Democrat staying right about the 30th percentile. Here's a final one of these charts. These are people who perceive the government as a threat by party identification. 92% of Republicans say that big government is a threat. Independents, it's 71%. And even Democrats, it's 56%. So most of us in the United States, no matter what our party affiliation or leaning, see big government as a threat. What that tells us is that we might even be able to enlist the assistance of people who identify on the other side of the aisle, if you will. We need to stop thinking strictly party and start thinking about, are people want to tell us how to live our lives or don't want to tell us how to live our lives, okay? Are they for Constitution or not for Constitution?
Principle over party.
So we need to engage. Here's what Jefferson said. We in America do not have government by the majority. We have government by the majority who participate. All tyranny needs to gain a foothold is for people of good conscience to remain silent. We have a silent majority, and we need to get them engaged. And who's going to get them engaged? They're not going to do it by themselves. It's going to take people like yourself that are committed to this fight. And what do we do when we engage them? First thing we do is inform them. They need to know what's going on. This is what Madison said, knowledge will forever govern ignorance, and a people who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power knowledge gives. So what knowledge? We need to also motivate. This is from Patrick Henry's speech where he said, I don't know what others choose, but for me, give me liberty or give me death. I like the rest of it. Listen to this. Listen to this. They tell us, sir, that we are weak, unable to cope with so formidable an adversary. But when shall we be stronger? Will it be the next week or the next year? Will it be when we are totally disarmed and when a British guard shall be stationed in every house? Shall we gather strength by irresolution and inaction? Shall we acquire the means of effectual resistance by lying supinely on our backs and hugging the delusive phantom of hope until our enemies shall have bound us hand and foot? Sir, we are not weak if we make a proper use of those means which God of nature hath placed in our power. And we have to seize that power that we have. We need to take the initiative. We inform others of the ongoing destruction of their liberties, our culture, and our economic well-being. A lot of people are they only a little bit aware of it. We need to put a point on it and let them understand what's really happening. We need to ask them to participate in surveys. I think, Field, you might have mentioned that earlier. We plan to take surveys at least monthly, asking questions of people who participate about key issues that are happening either in the legislature or things we would like to see go before the legislature or things that are happening in government. And ask people in every county around the state and then take that information back to the people in government, people in office, and people who are lobbyists. And that will have power. And we need to lobby, and we need to vote. So let's take a look at inform. What do we inform them? First, people need to understand that our constitutional federal republic is being undermined. Power elites are undermining it, have been. Actually, before the ink was dry on the Constitution, there were monarchists who did not want to have a constitutional federal republic. They wanted to have that monarchy. And they've been working ever since. The power elites are not monolithic. It's not like you've got, it's like strictly like some sort of Marxist conspiracy, or it's the big corporations conspiracy. It's both of them. It's both of them. Let me give you some ideas here. There's a couple of professors who say that we are no longer a constitutional federal republic, that we are an oligarchy. This is a quote from their study. It said, economic elites and organized groups representing business interests have substantial independent impacts on U.S. government policy, while average citizens and mass-based interest groups have little or no independent influence. Moreover, when a majority of citizens disagrees with economic elites and or organized interests, they generally lose. These two professors that produced this study after 21 years, last year, one professor from Northwestern University, the other from Princeton. What we see going on with these elites from the left and the right reminds me of the Soviet Union. In the Soviet Union, they didn't have a means of changing the leadership the way we do through a legitimate election, and then you pass the torch to the person who wins the election. What you had was kind of a show of an election, but really there was a power struggle going on behind and purges happening, and then whoever was left standing became the next leader. That's how they chose. And that's really what's going on now. What you have, the elites on the left and the elites on the right, what they have in common is they don't want to have a constitutional federal republic. They don't want us to run the government. They want to run the government. So they'll work together to undermine the government, and then when that's done, we'll see who's left standing. Has anybody ever heard of this fellow, Antonio Gramsci, or cultural Marxism? I'm going to give you a quick brief about this fellow because he's really important. I'm going to suggest to you, if you got a little note, take his name down and Google him when you get home. Gramsci was an intellectual, an Italian born in Sardinia, and he became a Marxist after attending the University of Turin. And he became a leading voice for Marxism in Italy, and when Mussolini started to come to power, he decided it was time to get out of Dodge. And so he went where all good Marxists of that day wanted to go, which was Marxist paradise. That was the Soviet Union, which at that time was being led by Lenin. So he gets there, and to his surprise and dismay, this workers' paradise is anything but. You got people being forced into labor camps. You got purges, people by the hundreds of thousands being murdered, being shipped off to Siberia, even though there is a massive propaganda campaign going on. So Gramsci is not dissuaded that Marxism is wrong. He thinks Lenin's wrong, but you can't say that out loud. If you say that, you're going to get yourself shot. What he thinks is that you can't force people into Marxism. What you got to do is change their mind and change their heart. He said that the problem with the workers in the Soviet Union was they were too imbued with Western culture, specifically with Christianity. And that the way to get people to Marxism, to get them marched to Marxism, was to get Western culture out of them and to get Christianity out of them. And the way you do that is you infiltrate, what was the term I used before? All the institutions in society that are most influential in the formation of public opinion and policy. There was also an institute in Frankfurt, Germany, with some intellectuals there, called the Frankfurt School, where they thought the same thing as Gramsci. They picked up on his work. And when Hitler came into power, most of these people were Jewish, and they decided it was time to get out of Germany. And so they came to the United States, and they landed in places like Princeton University and Brandeis and Columbia University, among others. There was about 200 of them. And they decided that they were going to do the Cultural Revolution here in the United States, because Germany was being run by the Nazis. So after the war, a bunch of them went on back to Frankfurt, and they reestablished the Frankfurt School. But a bunch of them stayed here and were very instrumental in the intellectual part, if you will, of the events that took place in the 60s and the 70s.
Just to add a little comment to that, I'm sure many of you have already seen the movie Agenda, Grinding America Down. But basically, this is what happened. An Idaho legislator, he was asked by a friend of his to go down to this meeting in Berkeley. A bunch of Marxist communists were going to meet there, and he said, well, I'll go down there. And he got down there, he thought it'd be a bunch of people with hippies and long hair, but he got there, they were wearing business suits and carrying briefcases. Well, he took notes. He says, well, they'll never be able to implement what they're talking about here. Well, 30 years later, he got those notes out, and he realized they had implemented every one of their plans. And he produced the movie Agenda, Grinding America Down. So I suggest you all get that. He'll go into more detail about how this cultural Marxism is taking place.
We'll have a paper on our website, which will be about Gramsci and also the cultural Marxism that you'll be able to access. Actually, the website is under construction now, thanks to Kim and others in our group. These are some of the people that stayed in the United States and that were influential. I don't know if you can read their names or not. Okay, so they infiltrated, as I said, all of the institutions of our society that are, look at there, you got the news media. 6 companies own what percentage?
90% of the media is controlled by 6 companies.
90% of the news media in our country is owned by 6 companies. Okay.
News and entertainment. It's not just the news, it's news and entertainment are owned by 6 multinational companies. 30 years ago was like 40 or 50 companies own 90% of the media, so we're all being controlled by this select group.
By the way, I'm married, but I'm used to interruptions. However, I'm also very hard of hearing, so that's why I'm waiting to take questions until after. You know, my wife keeps telling me I need to get a hearing aid. You know what I say to her? What? You know. So anyway, you see that, you know, the churches have been infiltrated, and they're being intimidated by 501c3. They're actually telling ministers now what they can and what they can't say. Leave that Leviticus out of there, boys, you know, right? And we see the entertainment media. We got all the cliches, all the liberal cliches, if you want to call them liberal. On the other side of the aisle, if you will, we have corporatism. And what is corporatism? It is the organization of society into industrial and professional corporations serving as organs of political representation and exercising control over persons and activities within their jurisdiction. This was like Mussolini's Italy, right? Fascism. Fascism, and this is another name for corporatism. We have elements of that going on in our country today too. And we have people that we identify as on the left participating and leading elements of corporatism. So it's a mishmash. Who is it involved? It's big business, big labor, big news media, the education establishment, foundations, internationals following foreign policy, easy for you to say, like CFR, and big political donors, etc. Okay, so we got our government, our Constitution being undermined by power elites. But also what's affecting us is us, we the people, citizens. We are distracted with our football and our, what was it you were saying earlier?
Oh, wow. We're more concerned about the NCAA than we are about the NDAA, you know, and the National Defense Authorization Act. There's more talk this week about someone changing their sex than there is talking about the transportation partnership that's going on, that's going to affect all of our economic lives and our rights. So we're paying attention to the wrong thing. We're not focusing on what things that really matter.
So we're distracted. We're disengaged. Too many of us are not engaged in don't know what's going on in our communities. I've lived here in Georgia since 1965. I came here from Kentucky, and one of the things that I miss about Kentucky is that there, at least in the rural areas, everybody knew who was on their equivalent of the county council. It was called fiscal court. Everybody knew who was in government office and knew what was before government. You know, I came here, I've been living in Roswell since '75, and most people, there's 40% of people in North Fulton County that are eligible to vote aren't even registered. Disengaged. Ill-informed. People are getting their news from mainstream news media, even outlets like, in my opinion, Fox News. They're clever about how they twist things, okay? You'll notice, if anybody watch O'Reilly? Yeah, okay. Notice this about O'Reilly. Now, I don't dislike Bill O'Reilly, and I'm not like, you know, trashing the guy. But notice this about him. Every now and then, he'll talk about, oh, we need a solution to something, and we need a federal law. We need to federalize this. And it's like always an unconstitutional thing. So Bill O'Reilly is no friend of the Constitution, okay? So it almost seems like it's a setup to me. Maybe I'm getting paranoid, but you know, it's like, okay, he says all this good stuff, and then all of a sudden he comes in with one of these things that's unconstitutional. Yeah, let's do that, you know. And misinformed, get bad information, and compromised. Over half of us now are getting some kind of subsidy from the government, and I'm not talking about Social Security here, because we paid for Social Security.
Here.
Now we're going to see that guy on the couch. There he is. So it's citizen ignorance and apathy is part of what our problem is, and that's why it's so important for us to go out and engage and inform. I mean, because so many people are sitting there watching their TV, watching their their football or basketball or whatever in the city is burning down, the country is burning down around behind them. Did you want to say something?
Well, I said about the TPP and the NCAA.
Speak in there.
Well, I'll just say it again about one of the ladies I work with. It was basketball season a couple of years ago, and she was all excited about the Kentucky Wildcats. You're a Kentucky fan, and all about the NCAA. And I said, well, you know, Gwen, I'm more concerned about the NDAA than I am about the NCAA. She says, well, what is that? And so I explained it to her. She said, well, that doesn't sound good at all. I said, yeah, that's what's happening. And of course, I'm sure most of you have heard of the National Defense Authorization Act, giving the president authority to basically pick up anybody in the world anytime without any due process. Violation of the Fifth Amendment. So that was what I was going to say there.
That's good. All right, let's go on back. Fundamental transformation, where we heard that before. The United States, we've been promised, is going to be fundamentally transformed. To what? To what? So we see that this is again what we need to inform people who are misinformed, ill-informed, not engaged, okay? That federalism has been dismantled. And we need to tell them why it's important to them that federalism has been dismantled. You noticed earlier when I described our country, I didn't just call it a republic, and I didn't just call it a constitutional republic. I called it a constitutional federal republic. And that federal is extremely important, and you will see why. We also have unconstitutional federal acts that are unchecked, and the federal government is saying they are uncheckable by us. The rule of law has been replaced by a guy with a pen and a phone, right?
Yep.
By the rule of man. They need to know that. And that our culture is being uprooted intentionally. As John Adams once said, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Our standard of living is being diminished. If you're in the middle class, you are being squeezed. All right, so let's take a look at how our federal republic, or our federalism, became dismantled. Paved with good intention. What is it? The highway to hell is paved with good intentions, right? Well, this is about the 14th Amendment. These folks right here, these were former slaves, set free, and what happened with them, as you all probably know, in many of the states, including many of the states in the North, people who were former slaves did not enjoy full rights. There were only 10 states in the United States in 1865 that didn't have some kind of law that was like a Jim Crow law and that inhibited black people from voting. So in 1868, the 14th Amendment was proposed and amended and ratified rather. And basically what it said was that people who were former slaves, it didn't use that term, but it said, you're born here in the United States, you're a citizen, and you have full rights, privileges, and immunities of all citizens. That's what they intended, that's what they had. But what's happened is, over time, that has been twisted, that has been turned into something else. Starting in the 1920s, actually up until the 1920s, the Supreme Court had ruled several times that the interpretation of the 14th Amendment was just what I said. It applied to former slaves. In 1873, the slaughterhouse cases reaffirmed that idea. But even in 1833, Chief Justice John Marshall said that the first 10 amendments contained no expression indicating intention to apply them to state governments. It was only directed at the federal government, right? Okay, so what happened? 1925, Gitlow versus New York, the court held that the First Amendment protection of freedom of speech applied to the states through the Due Process Clause. So over time, from 1925 on up to the present time, including in 2010, the case, Second Amendment case, one of the first, where the Supreme Court began applying selectively the Bill of Rights to the states. Now, on one hand, I find it kind of justifiable, because if we believe that our rights are God-given and unalienable, do we? Okay, then why should the state be able to take our rights away from us, right? Who's going to check them? Somebody got to check them, right? So, on one hand, I can understand that it's justifiable. The problem is that there is no check, equal check, on the federal government. Remember, we're supposed to be of checks and balances? So where's the check on the federal government? Article 6 of the Constitution, the Supremacy Clause, says that laws of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land. That's what we were taught in school, right? Federal law trumps state law. Well, this is what Alexander Hamilton said. It will not, I presume, have escaped observation that it expressly confines the supremacy to laws made pursuant to the Constitution. In other words, the only laws, federal laws, that are supreme are those that fall within the powers that we, the people, through our states, delegated to the federal government, which are found in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. They have no right to exercise power over any areas that are not within those powers that were delegated to them. So, when federalism was dismantled, and that's what it did, it puts the Supreme Court in a position to stand in judgment of all matters. State government, local government, individuals, anybody, anything, the Supreme Court can and does weigh in on. Even in areas where they are prohibited from going. Federalism was also dismantled by block grants, which creates dependency on the states and subservience. Back in the 1970s, the early 70s, I was on staff of Governor Wendell Ford up in Kentucky. And that's when grants with federal revenue sharing first came in. And Ford was a states' rights guy. And he called a group of us and he said, all right, you'll have to go on out to the counties and the cities in these regions of the state and talk to the mayors and the county commissioners there, it's called county judge. He said, and tell them to spend that money that comes down on capital expenses, not on anything with continuing expenses. Because even though in this first year there's no strings attached, you can bet your bottom dollar in future years there will be strings attached and the federal government will be telling us all what to do. So I ended up in Barberville one day and I went to talk to the mayor there. He was a dentist and I told him, you know, what the governor said. And he said, well, he said, you can just go on back to Frankfort and tell Mr. Ford that we've got that figured out down here in Barberville. He said, see, it's election time, and my opponent thought he had me on that issue because we bought a fire truck with him. And we were debating over at high school, and he said to me, what a waste. What are we going to do with the old fire truck? He thought he had me. I said, we're going to send it to the false alarms. So, take a look at this dependency rate. This is starting